Hey guys, Andrews here with the much awaited 2019 updated class guide. It's been a while since I've made one of these, but it's about time I get to it, and with it we have to go over a couple of things. Since this is a guide geared toward newer players, Black Desert has 17 classes to choose from as of the date of this video, and with surely more to come in the future, this means it's going to be hard for me to give you an in-depth analysis compared to someone who has been playing a single class since the start of the game can give you. I'm one of those players that likes to play everything, which leads me to be a master in nothing, kind of like real life. So with that said, all of these statements are of course from my perspective and are my opinion, and I urge you to seek out your class discords and veteran players who have been playing your class of choice for a long time. The pitfall many new players fall into is trying to play every class from the beginning and then being led by what is the stronger class at that given time. The meta will not matter to you because by the time you as a newer player reach the gear level required to competitively PvP, the meta will have shifted and you may be stuck with a class that wasn't as strong as you wanted it to be. That is why I say try the classes out. After this guide, see what appeals to you. Check out the addendum to this video, which is the class trailers video I posted a little while back, and see how you enjoy the class. For newer players, the class dynamic will change greatly once you hit level 56 and then at 60. So it's a good idea to at least level a class you're interested in to level 56, awaken it, which means to do the quest line to obtain your class's second weapon, and then decide if you like the class or not. All classes in the game are gender locked, so keep that in mind when making your decisions. I am including some brief skill demonstrations in this video to give you a flavor of what each class can do, but they are very basic, so keep that in mind. Highly skilled players make some classes look insane, so seek those out if you're interested. With that long but necessary intro, let's get into the rating system, which honestly I was not going to include. But this time around, I think it's a good gauge that will give you an idea of how a class performs in different situations. One-on-one situations mainly mean dueling or open world combat. PvP large scale means how the class does in guild wars. PvE clear just means how quickly a class can kill monsters. And I'll say this also means that PvE clear changes depending on the location where you grind at and the density. So the PvE clear rating is just an average. A class can be better or worse than I rate. And finally, we have skill ceiling. So the higher the rating, the more room you have to improve and learn. A high rating generally means that the class is quite difficult to master, and some high skill ceiling classes can be great and rewarding to play, but it sometimes is the case where a less difficult class will still beat you at equal gear levels simply because your class matchup is unfavored. Okay, so those are the ratings and explanations out of the way. I expect there will be those who complain, so the comment section is down there. If you are a veteran player of a class and you hopefully aren't offended, but if you are, tell us why you think a class deserves a higher rating. But keep in mind, I've tried to compare all the classes together, so I've attempted to be as fair as possible. Now first up, we have the Warrior. Classic class, male, uses a longsword and a shield, and has a greatsword as its awakening weapon, which is its second weapon. Warrior is very good in one-on-one situations. It used to be a lot more tanky before it received some nerfs, but it's received a few buffs recently that are putting Warrior back on track to becoming a fairly decent class. Not as popular these days, but one of the OG classes. I like to call it the always dependable class, and one of the classes with really good performance all around. Its PvE clear used to be one of the worst, but nowadays every class clears okay, and there are many different spots and different gear levels you can grind in to find one that suits your style of play. It's not the fastest grinder, but it's much better than it used to be. Warrior has a high skill ceiling, meaning once you master this class, you will be able to obtain some incredible mobility and pretty deadly burst. It's currently outshined by some other classes that do the tanky role better these days, but it is by no means unable to at least try to play that role. Next up, we have Valkyrie, female, a paladin-esque class that uses a longsword and a shield and has a lancia as its awakening weapon. Valkyrie is very good in one-on-one situations, but requires mastery of the class to do well in pretty much all facets of play. PvE clear is mediocre, but she gets better the more gear you have, and they're able to use some support utility skills that can affect your teammates, making her always nice to have in large-scale PvP. Her heals aren't amazing, but they're still kind of utility. Her defensive capability is quite strong, but really where she shines is in her incredible burst potential. Skill ceiling isn't as high as Warrior, though it still takes a lot to master the class, and once you do, you will be feared by anyone you deem unworthy. A good Valkyrie is like a comet when you see them fight. It's kinda scary. Now, they've been outshined by other classes that don't need as much effort, let's just say, to play well, but recently she received some buffs that have put Valkyrie into the direction of being something to look at seriously when choosing a class to dedicate your time to. Next up, we have Berserker, male, giant race class that uses axes and an ornamental knot, and an iron buster for its awakening. Berserkers are the typical high health, high damage hybrid tank-esque class of Black Desert, but they require a lot of practice to do well in PvP situations. They're okay on one-on-one duels and average in large scale, though because of your high health and range CC, you can become a sort of DP Berserker that crowd controls enemies and then sets up your teammates to get kills. It's really not practical though, and it really only works in smaller PvP situations like 3-on-3 duels. But a good Berserker is a scary class. Just because they have high health though doesn't really mean they have inherently strong defenses. Their mobility at high skill levels are insane, and their PvE clear is incredibly good overall. Berserker has many grabs and limited range through its awakening, but it's a class I'd say is really fun to learn and play at higher levels. Warrior, Valkyrie, and Berserker kind of make up the tank role if you're looking at a Trinity-like MMO, but they don't end up playing that way because Black Desert is just a different kind of game with no roles really. Ironically, the mages, who are usually squishy, make for some pretty good tanks in certain situations, the Wizard and the Witch. Now let's start with Wizard. Male uses a staff and dagger, and then the Goddard Sphera for its awakening. Wizards and witches play identically before getting their second weapon. You can cast fire, ice, lightning storm, chain lightning, heals, resurrect, but most importantly, they can cast a skill called Protected Area, which makes them the most sought after Guild Wars class in the game. That skill amplifies your allies' defenses by an obscene amount for a short amount of time, which allows for pushes into enemy bases. And its awakening, the Wizard uses fire and water elemental abilities and can summon an elemental pet, fire for melee and water for ranged. Wizard also has a lot of protected skills, which means it's difficult to crowd control a wizard, and his large AoE abilities make grinding with Wizard quite easy. He does struggle a bit at higher end grind zones, but overall he's one of the best grinders and absolutely a great class for newer players. His downside is his complete failure at dueling. You can be successful in smaller one-on-one fights, but the odds are greatly against you simply because Wizard, and this also goes for Witch as well, their skills keep you rooted, so it's very easy to grab and combo a Wizard and Witch. Despite them probably being the worst one-on-one classes in the game, they do make it up for being one of the best PvE clearers and Guild War classes in the game. Now Witch, the female version of Wizard, also uses a staff and dagger, but uses an Ad Sphera for her awakening. She commands Earth and Lightning in her awakening, and is able to summon an Earth Elemental for melee and Lightning Elemental for ranged. Both Witch and Wizard have skills that allow them to aggro over the mob limit, so you can kill more monsters at once. The Witch has a block that increases her resistances, and her skills have slightly more range than Wizard. Wizard, I forgot to mention, has a grab instead of the block. Very slow grab though, and not very reliable. Because Witch and Wizard have the same pre-awakening abilities, they can both use Protected Area, which makes Witch very sought after in guilds for Guild Wars. PvE clear is very good as well, with struggling a bit in the high-end zones, but again, one of the best clearers in PvE and one of the best classes in Guild Wars. Both Witch and Wizard are not terribly difficult to learn, so they make for the more common choices for newer players to choose from. Witch and Wizard can become defensive heavy as well with gear, and Witch specifically can be very annoying crowd control style class and a smaller PvP that can absolutely do some damage even at lower attack values. Next up we have Sorceress, female class, uses an amulet and a talisman, uses a scythe for her awakening. Sorceress is a mobile dark magic user with decent one-on-one potential thanks to having a lot of iframes or invincibility frames. She isn't as useful in large-scale battles, but her ultimate black hole ability is still very useful in group fights. She's been nerfed over time, so she's not as good as she used to be. Couple that with the fact that this class takes a lot of time to master and play well, she becomes one of the most technical classes in the game. She has good potential and is quite good at grinding, even at high-end areas. Solid class overall, but I wouldn't say it is a new player-friendly class. since you need to practice a lot and then you need quite a bit of gear to compete at high levels. When played well though, she's pretty much unstoppable. Next up we have Dark Knight, female, elven race character, uses a Kriegsmesser and an ornamental knot for her weapons and a Vediant for her awakening. Vediant is sort of like a magical glove that summons different sword shapes. Kriegsmesser is like a very long dagger. Dark Knight used to be the best class in the game, hands down, but has since been nerfed multiple times to now being one of the weakest classes. That's not to say it's a terrible class. Dark Knight just now requires a bit more resource management, which adds to its limitations and requires a certain mastery of the class to do well in PvP situations. It's a fairly squishy class with decent mid-range AoE. Its mobility has recently been nerfed, so she's lost some mobility there, but is by no means slow. Her PvE clear is still very good, even at high end, and it's a fairly simple class to learn if you're starting out. Dark Knight overall is a shadow of its former oppressive self when it released over a year ago, but it's still an okay class if you enjoy the playstyle and put the time and gear into it. Next up we have Tamer, female, the lolly class I guess you could call it, though you can customize the Tamer to be less childlike if you for some reason have a problem with lollies. She uses a short sword and a trinket for her weapons and the celestial bow staff for her awakening. Tamer is able to summon Heilang, a mystical wolf pet that she can ride on, and unlike the witch and wizard pets, Heilang has some more utility. He can do a random crowd control attack, for example, when you order it to attack. That plus Tamer having one of the quickest grabs in the game and incredible burst make her very deadly in one-on-one situations. She's still very squishy and very difficult to master, so one mistake and you're pretty much dead unless your opponent messes up or something. Her PvE clear is quite good at all areas in the game since she's quite mobile and has good resource management. Like I said, she's extremely difficult to learn and master, and is not great at all in large-scale fights, so you'll find yourself unable to really help. I guess it's worth mentioning she does have a little bit of a party utility buff, but it's nothing to really depend on. She's a good class overall with its obvious shortcomings, but with recent buffs she should be getting a little bit better moving forward. Tamer makes it the last of the magic damage users. Those are Witch, Wizard, Sorceress, Dark Knight, and Tamer. They all deal magic damage in their attacks. Even if they use melee, it will be considered magic damage. What this means is that the next two classes will be resistant to a portion of that damage since Striker and Mystic have inherent magical defenses. Now let's start with Striker. When Striker was released, it was underpowered at the time. It's a male class, uses Gauntlet and a Vambrace as his weapons and a Guard Brace as his awakening weapon. It's tanky thanks to its magical defenses, but it didn't really put out a lot of damage when it first came out. Nowadays though, they have great burst and very good mobility. Their uniqueness comes from being able to summon multiple clones, or stands if you will, through certain skills that deal damage alongside you. Their PvE clear is very good, though because of their awkward mobility it can be cumbersome to grind in certain areas of the game, so he's limited in that capacity. One-on-one he's quite strong if played well, and in large-scale fights he has great AoE and can withstand a bit more than usual thanks to those magic resistances. I wouldn't say he's hard to play, so he does make for a new player-friendly class. As for Mystic, the female version of Striker, she also uses Gauntlets and Vambrace for her weapons and a Cestus for her awakening. Her signature trait is the ability to summon a water spirit dragon that does damage alongside her with certain skills. Tanky thanks to her magical resistances, really good defensive skills, quite mobile, really good resource recovery. Her damage isn't as high as a Striker, but her superior crowd control abilities make up for that. She's able to be built like a crowd control bot with super high defenses, low attack. Her PvE clear is one of the best, if not the best, currently in most areas of the game. She's a bit harder to play than Striker, but I wouldn't say she was extremely difficult to master. It does take some time to get used to it, but don't get me wrong, more often than not, you should be favored in most matchups. If you want an answer as to what is the strongest class in the game overall, it would be Mystic. Some classes do better in some areas, but Mystic does everything fairly well without requiring you to play for a long time to master. Next up we have Musa, male class, uses a blade and a hornbow for his weapons and a crescent blade for his awakening. Now Musa is extremely mobile with large AoE abilities, making him quite deadly at high gear levels. His PvE clear is one of the best in the game. He's just fast and with large AoE abilities is able to dash from one pack to another, killing them with one skill quite easily. He even does quite well at high-end grinding areas with enough attack value. This makes him pretty decent in large-scale battles, as a strong Musa can mow the lawn, so to speak, mow down weaker players with one skill essentially. Pretty cool to see, to be honest. One-on-one is a bit tougher and requires quite a bit of practice and a level of mastery before you can start doing well though. His hornbow mostly is a PvP tool, so don't expect too much range just because he has a secondary weapon that is a bow, and overall I'd say he's quite good, quite fun, and certainly a good class to pick if you're new. Next up we have Maehwa, female counterpart to Musa. Uses a blade and a hornbow for her weapons, and a carry spear for her awakening. Maehwa is also extremely mobile with conal AoE abilities. Her PvE clear isn't as great as Musa's, but it's still quite good. Her mobility helps a lot with that. It will just depend on where you're grinding, since larger packs are slightly harder to hit with her conal AoE abilities. She has quite a bit of crowd control as well, and is decent at one-on-one situations, though as of late she's in need of some buffs. I put her at 4 stars because I believe buffs are coming quite soon, which is why I'm keeping her at 4 stars for one-on-one situations though. You have to keep in mind she takes a lot of mastery to do well in PvP, so it's certainly a skill-reliant class if you have the gear. In larger fights, she struggles a bit since she's a bit squishy. She's a good class overall and is fun like the Musa, but you'll struggle if you come in with little knowledge about the game, so I wouldn't call her a new player-friendly class. Next up, we have Ninja and Kunoichi. These are the assassin-style classes you may be familiar with from other MMOs. Ninja and Kunoichi both use short swords and kunai and shuriken for their secondary weapon. Both classes can use either kunai or shuriken, though abilities for Ninja are tied to the shuriken and abilities for the Kunoichi are tied to the kunai, so you should use the appropriate ones for each. Now we'll start with Ninja. Ninja uses a Sura katana for his awakening, multiple katanas that he's able to use as an awakening skills. He is mobile in short distances and has some pretty good combo damage. He's very difficult to learn and master, but one of, if not the most flashy looking class in the game. They were recently nerfed a bit since they were unable to be countered in some instances, so Ninja are still one of the best one-on-one classes in the game. Their grind speed will be dependent on where you grind, but overall it's a middle of the road PvE clearer. Ninjas aren't extremely useful in large guild war fights, but their forte really is one-on-one fighting and open world PvP. Kunoichi is very similar, that they share the same abilities pre-awakening, but Kunoichi, being the female counterpart to Ninja, uses a Sat Chakram instead as her awakening weapon. This gives her a slightly better PvE clear, but overall is in a similar state to Ninja. Both Ninja and Kunoichi are able to go invisible and get the jump on you in an open world scenario, making them favored as a classic assassin style evil karma character. Kunoichi has superior crowd control abilities to the Ninja though. It is difficult to learn and master, and it is one of the better one-on-one classes in the game. Guild Wars wise, Kunoichi struggles a bit, but she can be somewhat useful as a crowd control bot if you are practiced enough. These two classes are not very beginner friendly, and Ninja is the more popular choice over Kunoichi these days, who is one of the least popular classes in the game right now. Next up we have Lahn, female class, uses a crescent pendulum and a noble sword as her weapons, with her awakening being crimson glaives, sort of like God of War. Lahn is probably the most underrated class in the game right now. They have the unique ability to fly for short duration, more like glide really, but still pretty cool. Their AoE is decent and their PvE clear is quite good. Excellent resource management, some good iframes. Range grab makes her potentially deadly in one-on-one situations. Because she is so unpopular though, not many people know how to fight a Lahn, so that more often than not becomes an advantage. But she is extremely squishy, so one mistake or a bad damage trade will mean certain death. This also makes her not as potent in Guild Wars since she can't really survive for very long. Overall, good class though. I'd say she's not incredibly easy to learn, but there's room for mastery there that can make her pretty strong in most aspects of the game outside of Guild Wars. Next up we have Ranger, female, elven race class, uses a longbow and a dagger, and a Camisylvan sword as her awakening, which is just a longer dagger essentially. Ranger is strictly ranged pre-awakened before you hit level 56, and then you become mostly melee with the use of the Camisylvan sword. She's quite mobile, presents a quick style of play, and her PvE clear is quite good, though her biggest drawback is high resource consumption. Mana, though in my opinion, not as bad as it used to be, but stamina consumption was nerfed a while back and is the most annoying aspect for most Ranger players. She has very good damage. One-on-one she can be deadly with enough gear. Past a certain attack value she will easily one-shot you if you let her CC you. And I'd say she's not the easiest class to learn or master. It takes a lot of time and gear, but she offers a different style of play that I personally find enjoyable. In terms of Guild Wars, she's not very useful, especially at lower gear scores. You won't be very effective, and it's important to know that her range skills are there, but she's not a pure range character, so keep that in mind. For pure range, you want to be looking at the final class we'll be talking about, Archer. Archer is a male elven race class, uses a crossbow and the Ragan. Ragan is like a magic glove as his weapons. He uses a great bow for his awakening, and it is the only class to start with his awakening, so you don't need to level to 56 to get your awakening weapon. You start with it. His range on some of his abilities is extreme. This class is still fairly new, so not many people have cracked the code, so to speak, to fulfill the full potential of this class, but he is consistently getting buffs, so he is without a doubt a strong class. We just don't know how strong yet. Range is always powerful and he has a lot of it, and his mobility is quite good, as well as his resource management, where he doesn't really suffer too much like the ranger does, for example. PvE clear is very good in certain grind spots, but it's reliant on grind areas and density, so he can be a bit awkward to grind with till you find a good rotation to use. One-on-one duels, I'd say he's mediocre to good. With these buffs recently, he might be a bit better, but he really shines in Guild Wars, where he can CC and deal damage from afar with the support of his teammates. Really interesting abilities as well. He has one ability that is more novel than useful though, but it uncovers enemies in stealth and then prevents them from using stealth for a brief period of time. Not very practical, but cool that he has something like that. Not much else to say really, but this class is the newest class added to the game, so he will, by sheer will of the devs, be at least a decent class moving forward till we get a new class, as the newer classes get more love and are usually, not always, overtuned. And that's it for me guys for this 2019 class guide. Went through the basics and the flavor of each class. Hopefully it gave you an idea of what classes you may want to check out. When in doubt, play Witch or Wizard or Mystic or Striker, simple as that. If you want to have fun and enjoy the game for a long time though, try the classes out, see what you like, and master the class you love, regardless of future changes or the class rankings and the ever-changing meta leaderboards. Now let me know what you thought about this video in the comments down below. If you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them when I get a chance. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell icon to get notified as to when I upload my next video. And as always guys, thanks for watching, thanks for listening. I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.